Much aid do we give to Burma, particularly USAID? Do we know?
I don't know the precise figure off the top of my head. I can certainly,
Can you give me a range?
roughly about $80 million a year right now, fiscally.
Now, so the first thing we could do is cut that. Is much of that for democracy and human rights promotion, or is it mostly economic development?
There's a combination of economic development promotion, but also we have been a significant supporter of the peace process that's underway under the terms of what is called the National Ceasefire Agreement. Bear in mind, only 8 of the roughly 22, 23 EAOs have signed that ceasefire agreement. And I will throw in that while I was
there is the slogan, no justice, no peace. The idea that we'd be giving money to the Burmese government to help it achieve its objectives. Now, human rights and democracy may not be its objectives, but anything that is consistent with it, that we'd be giving them money for that, seems absurd, especially when we're talking about doing things that would cost the U.S. taxpayer money, such as sanctions or humanitarian aid, all of which may be warranted, but we should first do the thing that reduces expenditures. I'm going to ask this question probably for the record unless somebody knows, but I hope Dr. Martin and his team at the CRS will get me an answer. What's being done to publicize to the Muslim world China's support for this murderous regime, and what's being done to publicize the fact that we are doing more to protect the Rohingya than any other state other than those in the immediate neighborhood? I don't see anyone anxious to answer that question right now, so I'll ask that for the record. Now, an uncomfortable question. Is ARSA engaging in some smaller atrocities, and given our support for the Rohingya, can we persuade them to limit their actions to those against the Burmese military? Mr. Lohman, or anyone else?
There are reports of ARSA carrying out attacks and
against civilians.
Yes,
Okay.
and of course,
and for the record, they are tiny in quantity compared to what the Rohingya people are facing. At the same time, they undermine ARSA's the moral case that we are trying to make, and they also undermine the ability of the Burmese government to change its policy and become more reasonable. One atrocity against Buddhists in Rakhine State could make it difficult for those inside the Burmese government to change its policy. Let's see. Is Voice of America carrying the message that it should? Do the average person in Burma know what the world thinks of what their government is doing? Mr. Lohman, anybody know? If we don't have an answer, I'll ask for the record.
I can get you more information, sir. I know Radio Free Asia, for example, has regular stories about what's going on in Rakhine State.
Mm-hmm.
And
are those in the Burmese language?
Yes, there is a Voice of America or Radio Free Asia Burmese broadcast.
One would hope that they would have the courage at the Burmese service to push these stories, not just in the, I assume we have that we also broadcast in the language of Bangladesh. And it's a lot easier for that service to cover this message. And I'll just throw this out here. If the Burmese government disenfranchises some of its people, I mean, a government has a certain amount of territory for the benefit of its people. They have disclaimed over 1 million of their people. If they permanently show that they're unwilling or unable to protect the Rohingya, is a long-term solution the transfer of territory to Bangladesh. We obviously, as a nation, don't like to see sovereign borders changed, but when a nation refuses to allow its own people to live on its territory, it loses the right to control that territory. Dr. Martin.
Real quick, it's interesting you bring that up, because in the early days when there was a previous insurgent group among the Rohingya, what they wanted at that time was to be part of what was Pakistan, East Pakistan,
Which is today Bangladesh.
which
yes.
is today Bangladesh. So I do not know if ARSA and its leadership or the Rohingya people in general would want that.
Obviously, the first choice is the return of the refugees in citizenship, protection, and living in harmony with the other people of Rakhine State. But if that cannot be achieved, then a transfer of population has been achieved through this ethnic cleansing. Perhaps a transfer of territory would go along with it. For the record, I want to point out that the ambassador from Bangladesh has no comment.
Thank you, Mr. Sherman. We'll now go to Ms. Ann Wang.